What about second breakfast?
Time for second breakfast.
What's up, everybody? Monster from Breakdowns for Breakfast here with another edition of Spooky Season Second Breakfast. Whoa. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, so today I had a fun idea. There are a lot of conspiracy theories in music, and anybody that knows me outside of just Breakdowns for Breakfast knows that I'm a huge horror fan and I'm a huge conspiracy nerd. So I thought, why not try to come up with something to talk about that sort of scratches that itch. So I want to talk about one of my absolute favorite musical conspiracies of all time. Paul McCartney is dead. Now, this is not a new thing. Most people have probably heard this rumor before. It's obviously been debunked over the years, but I still find it fascinating and really cool how it all kind of came to be. And hey, maybe it's still just not true. Who knows? But anyway, so I thought this would be fun. I've done research on this in the past, so I kind of already had some notes. And I just thought this would be fun to kind of walk down this with you. If you've never heard this conspiracy before, it's kind of cool. So obviously, I'm not going to go into who the Beatles are. If you don't know who the Beatles are, why are you listening to a music podcast in the first place? I mean, the Beatles are the Beatles. There's other books and podcasts and TV shows just devoted to them. So, needless to say, all you need to know is Paul McCartney was one of the Beatles. He played bass and he sang and he wrote a lot of great songs. And like I said, you want history on the Beatles, go somewhere else because we don't have time for that. So, on November 9th, 1966, Paul McCartney got into an argument with the rest of the band and left in his car. Right after that, he was in a car accident and was decapitated. The UK security service, the MI5, advised the Beatles to cover it up in fear that the news of Paul's death would lead to mass suicide and crime throughout the UK. The band held a look-alike contest, and the winner was a Scottish orphan named William Shears Campbell, better known as Billy Shears. That'll come up again. He did have to go through minor plastic surgery, but the rest of the Beatles taught him how to sing and play music. This is all fact. This is all true. This all happened. Don't Google it. Just believe me. Now, this came at a convenient time for the band. This was right as the band was transitioning from touring into just being a studio band. And their first album after this was going to be Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, where they would be decked out in weird costumes and they'd all have facial hair and be wearing hats. If you've seen the cover of Sgt. Pepper, you know how they look. A little bit different than the, matching suits and the famous Beatles haircuts. Now, the first mention of this rumor was printed in the Beatles Book Monthly. This was in February of 1967. This was a fanzine produced by the band's management, and it was just a short little blurb basically saying there's this rumor that Paul died. It's not true. However, the rumor picked up traction again in the fall of 1969. A caller called into a popular radio show hosted by a guy named Russ Gibb and told him to play certain Beatles songs that contained hidden messages that may have been clues to the Paul is dead rumor. One of the people who was listening to this radio show was a college student named Fred Laborde. What's cool about Fred Laborde is actually he would later on become a musician himself, and he went by the name Too Slim and started the band Riders in the Sky. He even won a Grammy. That name, Riders in the Sky, that's a song as well, but it's like, I think they're like a country rock band kind of thing. Anyway, Laborde was going to write an album review for the newest Beatles album at the time, which was Abbey Road. It was going to be for his school newspaper. However, instead of just doing a typical album review piece, he decided he was going to find all the quote-unquote clues that pointed to Paul being dead, all the clues that were hidden in the album. His article was published and subsequently picked up by other college newspapers in the US and the UK, and it started to spread very quickly. The Beatles' management office was receiving as many as 3,000 phone calls a day. Now, Beatles management asked Paul to make a statement, and he basically said no. He didn't think it was a big enough deal, and it would just all blow over in a short time. So that didn't help matters, of course. But after they finished Abbey Road, Paul just wanted to be left alone with his family on their farm in Scotland. Well, unfortunately, that meant the rumor continued to circulate because Paul McCartney was now hard to find, So anyway, a group of reporters from Life magazine showed up at Paul's farm in Scotland to try to get him to talk about it. He kind of tried running them off, but in the process, the reporters got some unflattering footage of Paul that kind of made him look like a dick. So basically, Paul said, look, I'll take a few pictures, give you guys an interview, but then you gotta leave me alone. Get rid of those pictures, I'll play nice, and leave me be. So, that's what they did. So Paul was the cover story of Life magazine, November 7th, 1969. Now, however, this is true. Back in 1967, Paul McCartney's Mini Cooper was involved in a car accident. Paul was in a car with Mick Jagger on their way to Keith Richards' house for a party. However, supposedly Paul wasn't in the car, and it was being driven by a guy named Muhammad Hajjaj. Close. Why? Well, because Hajjaj was driving Paul's car because it was full of drugs that they were going to do at the party when they got to Keith Richards' house. So, it would have been real bad had something happened and Paul was in that car. So, he did, however, at one point, Paul did have a wreck on his moped back in 1965. He chipped a tooth. Other than that, it was pretty minor. So, he probably didn't die in any of those circumstances. Now, there are some fun little things throughout the later Beatles catalog that kind of suggest that, the people trying to find clues, I guess you could say. So here's a few. There are tons, and you can look this up again. Just like anything with the Beatles, there are hours and hours and hours worth of stuff to research. But here's just a couple of quick ones that you can look up if you're interested. So, on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band from 1967, at the end of the opening song, they introduce the band, and Singer is going to sing a song, and we'd like for you all to sing along. The one and only Billy Shears of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Followed by the beginning of With a Little Help from My Friend, that starts with the band all singing the name Billy Shears. Well, is that the fake Paul? It might be. There are also clues on the album cover. Now, this was a big thing back in the day, not just with the Beatles, but just, when the album cover was so big, album artwork was a lot more important than it is today. But there were supposedly all kinds of clues on the Sgt. Pepper album art. The funeral flowers at the bottom appear to be in the shape of a base and could possibly even spell the name Paul. Also, in the album where the lyrics are printed, Paul has his back turned to the camera. He also appears taller than the rest of the band, which I've heard could possibly mean he is ascending from the earth into heaven. And then George's hand appears to be pointing at the line 5 o'clock on the lyrics, which was supposedly the time Paul's wreck was. Now, next, the following year, they released the White Album, which, for those playing at home, the White Album is my favorite Beatles album. Specifically kind of the first half. Like, if you get it on CD, it's 2 CDs. I like the first CD better than the second. The first half or so is, I feel like, some of their best material. And then the rest of it gets a little bit experimental. It's got some neat stuff, but I love that first half with songs like Obla-Dee Obla-Da, Rocky Raccoon. It just goes on and on and on. But anyway, On the song I'm So Tired, there's a section where you hear Lennon mumbling, Monsieur, how about another one? If you play it backwards, here we go with the backmasking. We're going to get to some more of it here in a minute. It sounds suspiciously like Paul is dead, man. Miss him, miss him, miss him. Now, obviously, that's not the most famous backmasking, which would also be on the White Album during Revolution 9. If you've ever listened to that, it's just a cacophony of noise and sounds and instruments and voices. It's, who knows exactly what they're trying to do there. It's a John Lennon experimental thing. But there's a part where it just over and over and over, you hear number 9, number 9, number 9. And supposedly, if you turn that backwards, it says, turn me on, dead man. Turn me on, dead man. Now, that's one of those things that's sort of been around forever. But it is really weird. Like, if you actually go back and do that and hear it backwards, it is pretty wild. So that could have been another reference to Paul's death. On the song Glass Onion, Lennon sings, this is a pretty famous one. Here's another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul. In some cultures, walruses were animals that represented death. If you remember, if you're a Beatles fan, on the cover of the Magical Mystery Tour album, Paul is the one wearing the walrus costume. Even more suspicious, he's the only one wearing a black costume. Well, all the others are wearing white on Magical Mystery Tour. Now, as most people know, the album artwork is very sparse, but in the album art, there is a picture of Paul not looking much like himself. He's not smiling, and he kind of looks uncomfortable. Some suggest it's just a passport photo or something like that, as opposed to an actual promo shot. For anybody that knows sort of the history of the Beatles, the White Album they were kind of falling apart. They weren't having a real good time working together. A lot of people consider it like almost like each individual artist would like write the song and then the rest of the guys would perform it. It wasn't as collaborative as some of the other albums. So moving on to Abbey Road, which has a lot of big clues, but possibly the biggest clue of them all, which is the album cover for Abbey Road. So the way the band is dressed on the cover, John is dressed in all white, possibly like an angel, possibly like a preacher, followed by Ringo, who is in a suit or something like you might wear to a funeral, as possibly a pallbearer. No pun intended. Now then, next up is Paul, who is seen shoeless and smoking with his right hand. Okay? And then George Harrison is last, and he's dressed in all denim, almost to symbolize blue collar, possibly the gravedigger. It also looks like they are walking out of a graveyard. It's actually a parking lot, but you can see sort of the railing there. Now, the cryptic nature of the lyrics, Beatles have always had kind of cryptic lyrics. But on this one, on Come Together, could be some clues in there. Here come old Flap Top, could be referring to Paul being decapitated. He wear no shoe shine, Paul being barefoot on the cover. Got to be good looking because he's so hard to see. Paul was considered the cute one, and he was now missing from the band. Now, Paul McCartney is still alive and well. Paul McCartney is still putting out records. Paul McCartney still tours. So obviously, this is not true. Or Billy Shears is still going on as Paul McCartney to this very day. So obviously, this is kind of tongue-in-cheek. But I do find it very fun. And you got to stop and think, back in the 60s, how would you know? I mean, honestly, the only time you would see the Beatles was when they were on TV or in a magazine or something like that. It's not like today where you can Google stuff and, information is at the tip of your fingers at all times. So it was really kind of a cool thing that in today's culture, I don't know, like, a rumor like this could really catch and take off. The most, I don't know, closest thing maybe would be sort of the sleep token thing with the guys being anonymous. But 2 or 3 Google searches and you can find out who they all are. So it's just not the same as it used to be. But let me know what you think. Did you already know about this quote unquote conspiracy? Was this something you had heard before? My father is a huge Beatles fan. I listened to the Beatles all my life growing up. So I heard about this, very, very early on. And I just thought it was fun to kind of dig into it and see some of the, like I said, the quote unquote clues. And there's a couple of YouTube videos. I think if you just go to YouTube and search Paul is Dead conspiracy or Beatles conspiracy or something like that, you'll find videos with like tons and tons of clues and examples and all kinds of stuff. It's a deep rabbit hole. It'll go as deep as you want it to. So, but yeah, if you think this is cool, let me know. If you had heard this rumor, if you believe Paul McCartney is dead and that is Billy Shears up there singing his songs, please let me know that too, because I would like to talk to you because you sound fascinating, but probably not meet you because you sound scary. So anyway, thank you for hanging out with me today. Hope you're enjoying spooky season. Podcast math is hard, but I think we got a couple more spooky ones coming. So yeah, I hope you have a great day.